The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes after surgery wasn't a get well card or my husband's face. It was a TD fraud alert covering my phone screen, telling me $17,200 had just been charged to my Visa. My first thought was that someone had stolen my wallet. My second thought was that I was still groggy from anesthesia and had misread the number. I blinked twice and looked again. $17,200. Charged by Whistler Mountain Resort and Spa in British Columbia. My hands were already shaking when I called my husband. He answered on the third ring. His voice was warm, easy, the voice of someone who hadn't spent the last 6 hours worrying whether their wife would come out of emergency surgery. "Relax," he said before I'd finished my second sentence. "I'm at the office, everything's fine." Then he hung up. What happened in the next 48 hours changed everything. I thought I knew about my marriage, about my in-laws, and about my own willingness to keep making excuses for people who had never once earned them. 3 days before any of this, I'd been sitting at the kitchen table in our townhouse in Hamilton, Ontario, eating toast and answering for emails when the pain started. It came from nowhere, a sharp, twisting pressure on my right side that I tried to convince myself was a muscle cramp. By noon, it had turned into something I couldn't ignore. By 2 in the afternoon, I was in the emergency department at Hamilton General, bent over in a wheelchair while a triage nurse asked me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10. My appendix had become acutely inflamed. The surgeon used the word emergency 3 times during a conversation that lasted under 4 minutes, and by 6 that evening, I was being prepped for an appendectomy. My husband arrived just before they wheeled me in. He squeezed my hand, told me he loved me, and said he'd be right there when I woke up. He was not there when I woke up. I told myself he'd stepped out for coffee. I told myself the waiting room chairs were probably uncomfortable. I told myself a lot of things in those first confused minutes after surgery, and then my phone buzzed with that fraud alert, and every gentle excuse I had been quietly building for myself evaporated at once. After my husband hung up, I didn't move for a long time. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm. An IV bag dripped in slow, measured drops. I could hear voices in the hallway, someone being paged over the intercom, a cart rattling past my door. I opened my banking app with fingers that still felt thick and clumsy from the anesthetic. What I found wasn't just one charge, it was a list. Mountain View Lodge room reservation, $6,400. The Summit Table Restaurant, $890. Glacier Spa at the Lodge, $1,450. Whistler Village Specialty Shops, $680. Chairlift passes, equipment upgrades, room service, a wine package. Charge after charge, all stamped with timestamps from that same morning, beginning at 9:48 a.m., less than 2 hours after I'd been put under anesthesia. I set the phone down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Then I picked it back up and opened Instagram. The first photo had been posted by my sister-in-law 40 minutes earlier. She and my mother-in-law were standing in front of a massive timber frame lodge with snow-covered peaks rising behind them, smiling wide, both in bright rental ski gear. The caption read, "Mountain therapy is the best therapy." My brother-in-law had commented a string of ski emojis. My husband had liked it. The next photo showed everyone at a long restaurant table. My husband, his sister, his brother, his mother, 2 cousins I'd met maybe 4 times, and a family friend whose name I'd never quite managed to hold on to. There were bottles of wine, a cheese board, a fondue set that alone probably cost more than my weekly grocery run. My husband had his arm around his sister and was grinning the way he only grins in photos where he is genuinely, completely happy. He looked entirely unworried. I set the phone down again. My incision site throbbed under the bandaging. I sat with the knowledge for a moment, turning it over slowly, trying to make it make sense. It didn't make sense, so I called him again. He didn't answer the first time, or the second. On the third attempt he picked up, and I could hear music in the background, something live and upbeat, probably from the restaurant. "I need you to explain the charges," I said. I was not crying yet. I was still in the part that comes before crying, where everything goes oddly flat. "We put the deposits down back in September." His voice had shifted, still controlled, but with an edge underneath it now, like someone who has prepared a script. "If we'd canceled, everyone would have lost their deposits. You were going into surgery. There was nothing we could do about it." "You could have stayed," I said. "And done what?" "Sat in a waiting room for 6 hours. You're in good hands. We'll be home Sunday." A pause, and then almost as an afterthought, "I'll bring you something from the village." He ended the call before I could respond. I don't know exactly what I expected when I called my sister-in-law. Maybe some part of me still believed that if I bypassed my husband and went directly to her, she'd be the reasonable one. She had always made a point of presenting herself that way. Fair, direct, practical. She answered quickly. There was wind on her end or the sound of a chairlift, I couldn't tell. I know why you're calling, she said before I'd finished saying hello. Then you know my card was charged without my permission. Scott said you'd probably react like this. She said it the way you'd confirm a weather forecast. We knew you'd be upset, but you have to understand, this trip was planned for months. Everyone cleared their schedules. My mother doesn't travel well in summer. This was the only window. We couldn't just throw that away because of the timing. I was in surgery. You're also covered, she said. You're in a hospital. You're getting care. We weren't leaving you in a ditch. He took my credit cards out of my wallet, I said. I didn't give him permission to do that. He has access to your accounts. You've always shared finances. A brief pause, and then her voice shifted into something almost instructive. When you're feeling better, we can sort out the money side. But right now you need to focus on healing, not on being upset about a trip. She hung up. I called my brother-in-law next. He laughed, not meanly, just with the easy carelessness of someone who believed this was a minor inconvenience being inflated into a crisis. Come on, he said. You know how this family moves. It was go or lose everything. It was my money being spent without my knowledge. But Scott has access to your accounts. Technically isn't what I'm asking about. He went quiet for a second. Look, I'll talk to him when we get back. He didn't call again. I went through the group, one by one, calling each person who had appeared in those Instagram photos. 2 cousins didn't pick up. The family friend sent a text that said, "Hope you feel better soon," and nothing else. My mother-in-law, who I had driven to her cardiologist appointments 3 separate times in the past year, because her license had been suspended, and she didn't want to take a cab, told me through a crackling connection that she was too emotional to discuss finances on vacation, and that she would pray for my recovery. Not one person said I'm sorry. Not one person asked how the surgery had gone, or whether I'd been frightened, or whether I was in pain. The ward I was in had 6 rooms along one corridor, and from my bed I could hear the rhythms of the whole floor. Visitors arrived mostly in the afternoons. Footsteps, voices dropping to considerate quietness, the rustle of paper bags from the Tim Hortons on the ground floor. By the second evening, the nurses on my floor had quietly noticed that nobody was coming to my room. One of them, a woman with close-cropped gray locks and a habit of knocking twice before entering, started finding reasons to stop in. She'd ask whether I'd had enough water, or whether I wanted to try walking the hallway, or whether the television would help pass the time. She never made a production of it. She just showed up, which turned out to mean more than I knew how to say. My phone kept buzzing. Every notification gave me that half-second of stupid reflexive hope before I saw what it actually was. My husband sent a photo of the view from their room. Snow-covered peaks at dusk, orange light bleeding across the ridgeline, the kind that ends up on Destination BC tourism posters. He wrote, "Wish you were here, miss you." My sister-in-law posted a reel of everyone doing a group run down the intermediate slope. My mother-in-law put up a photo of her dinner, grilled halibut, beautifully plated, a candle on the table. She captioned it, "God's blessings." The halibut had been charged to my Visa. I stopped checking after that. I spent the rest of those days watching the light shift through my window and listening to the sounds of the ward. Other patients had people with them, partners pulling chairs close, adult children passing containers of food from home, someone down the hall whose family had brought a whole crowd and kept laughing too loudly until a nurse asked them to keep it down. My room stayed quiet except for the monitors and the occasional footsteps in the hall. For the first time in my marriage, I stopped waiting for someone to walk through the door. I already knew what the answer was. I just hadn't decided yet what I was going to do with it. When the door to my room finally opened on Sunday afternoon, my heart lifted for one automatic useless second. Old habits. My husband walked in wearing a navy pullover with a Whistler Blackcomb logo embroidered on the chest. His face was flushed from days in mountain air. He looked rested and good-humored and entirely like a man returning from a pleasant trip. "Hey you," he said, smiling. He set a small paper bag on my tray table and pulled up the chair beside my bed as though this were an ordinary visit on an ordinary afternoon. I looked at the bag but didn't reach for it. "Go ahead, open it," he said. Inside was a small rectangular fridge magnet, the kind sold in village gift shops for $10 or $15, with a cartoon mountain and the words Whistler, BC, in cheerful painted script. It had been purchased according to my banking app at 2:17 p.m. Saturday, charged to my Visa like everything else. "You bought me a souvenir with my own card," I said quietly. He shifted in the chair. "I mean, technically, yeah, but I wanted to bring you something." Before I could respond, he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through photos. The ski runs, the village lit up at night, the fondue restaurant, a group shot outside a gondola. He described each one with the animated energy of someone who has had a genuinely good week and wants to share it. He laughed, recounting how my brother-in-law had lost a rental glove on a chairlift and had to pay a replacement fee at the bottom. He didn't notice that I hadn't smiled once. A few minutes later, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law appeared in the doorway holding a balloon bouquet from the hospital gift shop. White and silver, "Get well soon," in looping script. My brother-in-law set a box of Purdy's chocolates on my tray table. My sister-in-law gave me a brief, firm hug and said, "See, we made it back." They talked over each other for 20 minutes, recapping the trip in pieces: the best run, the worst weather day, the night they stayed in the hot tub too late. Nobody asked whether I'd been frightened before the surgery. Nobody asked whether the recovery had been painful or lonely. They had brought balloons and chocolates and a $15 magnet, and they seemed to genuinely believe that covered whatever gap existed between what they'd done and what was owed. I watched them from the bed and felt something settle inside me. Not forgiveness, not even anger, just a very quiet clarity. I stopped expecting anything from any of them, and I started thinking about what I was going to do next. The morning after they left, I opened my laptop. I went through 6 days of charges methodically, the way I'd always managed our household finances. One column at a time, nothing skipped. I downloaded every statement from my TD Visa and our joint checking account going back 3 months, saved each PDF to a folder, then backed everything up to iCloud. Then I took screenshots of every individual transaction with timestamps visible on screen. The timeline was unambiguous. The first charge had appeared at 9:48 a.m. on the day of my surgery. The operating room records, which I requested from Hamilton General's Health Records Office, a process that took 2 days and cost me nothing under OHIP, showed I had been under general anesthesia from 9:22 a.m. Every single charge made on my visa that day had occurred during that window. I had been unconscious. I had not and could not have authorized a single one. I went through every text message next. I screenshotted every exchange I'd had with my husband, his sister, and his brother from that week forward. I saved the voicemails. I downloaded the Instagram posts. Then I contacted my carrier about retrieving backed up messages from iCloud. I'd been syncing automatically for 2 years without thinking much about it. What came back when the archive loaded included a thread I hadn't known existed. A group message between my husband and his sister, timestamped the morning of my surgery. Her message: "She's going in now. Doctor said minimum 4 hours, we should head to the airport." My husband: "Yeah, let's go. She'll be upset when she wakes up, but I'll handle it." His sister: "Just make sure she can't cancel the card." My husband: "She doesn't have her phone in the war, we've got time." I read it 3 times, then I set my phone face down and sat with my hands folded in my lap. They had talked about the timing, standing somewhere in that hospital, or already walking to the parking garage. They had worked out the window. They had considered whether I could stop them. They had concluded that I couldn't. I stopped feeling sad somewhere in that moment, and started feeling focused. My family doctor referred me to a physio for the post-surgical recovery, and during one of those appointments I asked if she had a recommendation for a family lawyer. She gave me 2 names without asking why, which I appreciated. I chose the one whose office was closer to my neighborhood, gathered my folders, and went. The lawyer read through everything at the conference table without interrupting. When she looked up, she said, You've documented this carefully. Don't confront him yet. Let it continue to build." That same week, I contacted TD's fraud division. The specialist walked me through the review process. She asked whether any of the purchases had been made with my knowledge or permission. I told her no. She asked if I had medical documentation, placing me under anesthesia at the time of the first charge. I told her yes. She noted everything, and before she ended the call, she asked one more thing. "Is there anyone who had physical access to your card itself? Not just account access, the actual card?" I thought about our home security system. a Ring doorbell camera and a second camera covering the front entryway and part of the kitchen. I hadn't considered the footage until that moment. I went home and pulled up the archive. The recording showed paramedics arriving at 7:41 a.m. My husband appeared at 7:48, carrying my overnight bag to the ambulance. At 8:11, the ambulance pulled away from the curb. At 8:29, my husband returned to the house alone. The entryway camera showed him walking directly to the kitchen, lifting my purse from the counter where I'd left it the night before, opening it, removing my wallet, and sliding out my TD Visa and my backup credit card. He put both in his jacket pocket, then he picked up his travel bag from near the door and left. No hesitation, no confusion. He went straight to my purse, took what he wanted, and walked out. I sat in front of my laptop for a long time after that. Then I forwarded the footage to my lawyer with a short note and closed the screen. For the next 2 weeks, I moved through daily life as though nothing had changed. I recovered from surgery, attended physio, made dinner, asked my husband about his day, listened to him complain about a project at work. He seemed relieved in the way people do when they've been bracing for a confrontation that never arrives. He said once that he was glad I wasn't still holding on to the Whistler thing. I told him I was focused on getting better. He never thought to ask why I'd started keeping my laptop closed when he came into the room, or why I'd quietly opened a new account at a different bank, or why I'd begun organizing files on my desktop with careful, consistent labels. He assumed silence meant acceptance. It didn't. It meant I was ready. The fraud investigator called on a Thursday morning just after 9. "We've completed our review," she said. "The evidence is consistent with unauthorized use during a documented period of incapacitation. If you'd like to proceed with a formal claim, we can move forward today." "Yes," I said, "please." Within the hour, the disputed charges were flagged. Our joint accounts were placed under restriction. My husband's supplementary card was disabled. I was sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea when his name appeared on my phone screen. "What did you do?" His voice was higher than I'd ever heard it. "My card got declined, at Esso, in front of people." "I filed a fraud report," I said. "You reported me for fraud?" "I reported unauthorized charges on my account." He was shouting by the time he hung up. 12 minutes later, my sister-in-law called. Her voice had lost everything that usually held it together. "Someone from the Whistler Resort just called me," she said. "They're asking who authorized the charges on the card. What is going on?" "There's an investigation. You need to call them and straighten this out." "I can't stop an investigation," I said. A silence. "Then this is family." "Yes," I said, "it is." The group chat erupted within the hour. Messages stacked on top of each other. Who had been contacted, what was being asked, whether anyone had spoken to a lawyer. My mother-in-law sent a voice note. One cousin posted a lawyer's name. My brother-in-law wrote that someone needed to talk to me. My sister-in-law replied that she had tried. I watched every message come in and didn't respond to a single one. My husband came home that evening with his shoulders tight and his face arranged around something that looked like injury, as though he were the one who'd been wronged. "The joint account is frozen," he said. "I can't access anything." "I know. How are we supposed to pay for groceries?" "I'd suggest calling the bank." He sat down across the table. "I know I should have talked to you first, I know that, but this, fraud investigators, this is going to follow me." He spread his hands flat on the table. "I'm trying to tell you I'm sorry. You took my credit cards out of my purse while I was being loaded into an ambulance," I said. "There's a camera at the front door. And in the entryway." The color left his face. "You knew the cameras were there," I said. "You just didn't think it would matter." His phone rang. He looked at the screen and answered on speaker. His sister's voice came through immediately, then his brother's. Within 30 seconds they were arguing. His sister said she had known from the beginning that using my card was risky. His brother said my husband had explicitly told everyone I had approved the trip expenses in advance. My husband said he had never used those words. His sister said that wasn't how she remembered it. His brother said there were texts that proved what had been said. I got up, washed my mug, and left the kitchen. Months later, after the divorce proceedings, after the judge reviewed every folder my lawyer and I had filed, after she used the word premeditated in her written decision, and said that a marriage does not grant one partner the right to access the other's finances during a medical emergency without a consent. I stood in the parking lot of my new building in Waterdown, with a single box of kitchen things, and the particular lightness of someone who has set something down they'd been carrying for a very long time. The credit card company reversed $16,200 in charges. My former husband was ordered to repay a portion of the remainder from the settlement. His family had fractured in the months since, not from guilt, as far as I could tell, but from the mutual suspicion that comes when investigators start asking each person separately what they knew and when. The story they'd agreed on early had too many moving parts, and under scrutiny it came apart on its own. His sister retained her own lawyer. His brother gave a statement that contradicted what my husband had told the bank. My mother-in-law stopped speaking to both of her sons. I didn't take satisfaction in any of it. I watched it happen the way you watch weather move through, present for it, but not part of it. I think about the morning I woke up from that surgery sometimes. The foggy head, the dry mouth, the sound of the ward, and then that alert on my phone screen. At the time, it felt like the worst possible beginning to an already frightening day. Now I see it differently. If that notification had never come through, I might have spent years convincing myself that the people around me were essentially good, and that I was simply asking too much. Instead, I got the truth at exactly the moment I was strong enough, barely, but enough, to do something with it. My appendix nearly killed me that November. My marriage dissolved in the paperwork that followed. I lost the townhouse, the shared routines, 7 years of a future I had been quietly building in the wrong direction. What I found on the other side was a 1-bedroom apartment with good light and a kitchen that is entirely mine. A savings account with my name on it alone. Sunday mornings that belonged to no one but me. I used to believe that losing the people who were supposed to love you was the worst thing that could happen. I know better now. Some losses are just doors, and the rooms on the other side are ones you never would have found any other way.